Go ahead and call the meeting to order. And can we confirm that there's a quorum?
Yes, we have a quorum and the press have been notified.
Thank you. Has everybody had a chance to look at the meetings from our last meeting back in May?
Yes.
If there are no changes to it, someone want to make a motion to approve?
Motion to approve. I'll second that.
All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right, our minutes are approved. Mr. Davidson, do you want to give us the fiscal year 2026 Q2 update on corporate strategies and business plan?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, members of the board, and it's good to be with you all. And wanted to provide a update on the second quarter for our corporate strategies. I'll remind everyone that we usually present to the board in February to provide a mid-year update. We'll come back in August to provide a year-end update, and we'll go over these three strategies, and I will share some accomplishments and then welcome any questions you may have. The first strategy is addressing Kentucky's housing supply gap. It's not news to anyone on this call that has been our focus and aim for quite some time, and we're telling the world about the supply shortage across all continuums of housing, and making sure it is a prominent policy issue and making sure we're communicating around that strategically. We're also aiming to continue to build relationships with non-traditional partners that may be able to fill that gap in space. So that is the first strategy. The second one, mitigate financial and missional risks by quickly responding to our programmatic changes in funding availability while communicating the value of all of our programs to legislators and grantors. We've had some ups and downs and some changes in HUD and some funding flow issues, but we're keeping an eye on those. We're mitigating those, and we're working hard to continue to deliver the services and the dollars, as well as make sure that we're maintaining the stewardship of our financial resources and managing the risk so that we're financially stable and equipped to continue to operate all the various programs that we do. And last but not least is sustain and advance core competencies. I'll talk a little more about that in just a second, but want to share. You can see making sure that our employees are engaged, that we're able to retain folks, keep the folks we have, and explore ways to use artificial intelligence and some other technologies to provide a good customer experience and operational excellence. Any questions about the strategies before I kind of highlight some of the briefly some of the items we're doing around each of those? If not, Sam, do you mind?
I have a question.
Sure.
Give me an example of non-traditional partner.
Oh, that's a good one. I'm going to ask Wendy to share a little bit. She's been meeting with a lot of partners that might be in that grouping.
Sure, that would be anything from the Kentucky Chamber, the Home Builders Association, but also as a good example, several of us went this past Friday and met with the Catalytic Fund of Northern Kentucky, which is they're a community development finance institution, and they do lending to economic development, commercial, and some housing projects, and they're trying to build a housing fund, and we're trying to talk about how we might partner with them. We never have before. So it's those kind of really trying to look at like who else should we be working with to make the pie bigger in terms of resources.
Thank you.
Great. That answer your question?
It did.
Great.
Thank
Any
you.
other questions? All right. If you will move it forward, Sam, just a little bit. I'm going to hit some highlights for mid-year. Again, mid-year. These are through 12/31, related to addressing the the housing supply gap, which is our first strategy. Stop me at any time if you have questions. But these are sort of grouped by department, and specifically, I'm going to give you the accomplishment and what our benchmark was. So you can see $305 million in loan production, single family loan production, on a goal of $500 million in our single family area. That is about 60% of the way there, halfway through the year. So we're tracking pretty well. We delivered $90 million in rental payments to over 22,654 project-based households. I'll remind everybody, these are the project-based PBCA side of our tenant assistance programs. Those units, the subsidies tied to those units, and those are all under contract with HUD. So the 22,654 and the 90 million is tracking right along the way we would expect it. The other portion, the other piece, the HCV side of our tenant assistance programs, we were able to deliver $15.6 million in rental programs to over 4,115 households. I'm going to pause there, and I always like to just remind myself and everyone else the magnitude of the dollars, but also the actual families. If you are looking at that, you're looking at over 4,000 households, and you're looking at 22,000 actual units that are supported by our tenant assistance program, which is very meaningful and very large and very needed. So almost 5,000 households are served through our homeless programs. We have a myriad of those. And that Wendy oversees, that is on a projection of 6,185. I would expect that number to continue to go up. And again, it's all about, when the funding comes, and we're on track for that. And that's a vital need as well. Last but not least, you're going to hear more about the multifamily programs in detail today, QAP. So I won't steal Wendy's thunder or any of the program areas' thunder, but 647 units created or preserved with via the tax-exempt bond program on a projection of 2,000. The short answer is funding rounds sort of come and go, and they sort of it's a matter of timing. So we do that projection at the beginning of the fiscal year. Some projects close faster, some projects don't, but we are tracking, and I will let you hear much more about the detail of our multifamily program, specifically from the program areas here shortly. But any questions about the first goal or any of the numbers I went over? Okay. Sam, if you'll move to the next one. Thank you. Mitigate financial risk. You will see a few very important numbers and metrics that the corporation tracks actually on a monthly basis, if not more frequent, but 837 loans per employee on a goal of 700. Tracy keeps her folks busy, and we are serving servicing a lot of loans. So all is well there. The almost $3.1 million in net, I'm going to point that out, net secondary market gains. Tracy's going to talk more about that to the finance committee, and probably provide an update to the full board here later this month, but that's on a goal of 5 million. Again, halfway through the year, we would expect that number to be tracking, and we're a little bit ahead of the track there. Last couple of items, this $400 and almost $80,000 of PBCA management occupancy review. That's what MOR stands for, fees to defer cost of conducting inspections. That is monies that we are receiving in incentive fees and things of that nature. That is very, very good. We've always been a high performer in the MOR area, and we've always collected the maximum fees and run that program actually very well, but at a surplus, and it helps us to offset some of the expenses for other programs with the excess fees. Example, this $480,000 for other programs. And last but not least, we administer a myriad of reimbursable or programs that have reimbursable expenses, and we get admin fees to cover those costs. Our goal is always to hit 100%. But we are at 94% of eligible reimbursable program expenses, and we are tracking really nice on that. That is a fairly new metric that has been helpful, and we're always trying to get as much out of the juice out of the lemon as possible and make sure we get all of our expenses covered. So, any questions about that?
John, it may be worthwhile just to underline that this is halfway through the fiscal year.
Yeah, very much.
Yeah, so even if we're not at 100%, there's a little catch-up time to even stay on pace.
Thank you for that, Wendy. That's exactly right. All right, the last one, and the last thing I have for you all today is sustain and advance core competencies. That's our final strategy. As I said earlier, we want to make sure that we're doing a good job of that. We've processed over 3,000 draws for more than almost $62 million in our corporate planning and accountability area, Kendrick Vonderschmidt's area. Those are draws that partner agencies request to operate their programs. So again, you can see halfway through the fiscal year, we're tracking nicely on the number of draws. You might ask, well, holy cow, 65 million, and we're already at 61.9 million. Those draws are bigger and bigger, the amounts that are being drawn down. And I just want to make note of that. But that is something that we continue to take very seriously. We have tight timelines around, the draw process, getting the money out to partners so that they can execute the programs they have. We hosted the Kentucky Affordable Housing Conference. I know some of you all were there. We had 750 attendees and partners. We set a goal of 675 in our marketing and communications area. So that was great. And we are having our Affordable Housing Conference in 2026 in August, and hope to continue to grow those numbers, have substantive programs and tracks, but also continue to invite traditional, non-traditional partners around the state to tackle address the problem of the affordability or the supply gap. Last few items here, also in communications, we are launching a new website with refreshed content that will be coming out in late spring. So we will have a new Kentucky Housing Corporation website. We have implemented a new HRIS, which is a new HR system, houses compensation, organizational charts, employee profiles, all of those things. It's much more streamlined, and it's been very helpful to a lot of staff. And then last but not least, as I alluded to earlier, in exploring ways to utilize artificial technology, we've developed AI guidance in preparation for utilizing some AI tools, specifically Copilot, and some other AI tools in the corporation. We are leaning into that, but we're also very much managing the risk. The water gets deep very, very quickly when you start to push into some of these tools. So, but with that, I'm happy to entertain any questions if anybody has any. If not, this was for information only. There's no motion needed or no action by this committee. Thank you all.
All right, Wendy, do you want to take us through updates to the multifamily programs?
Yes, thank you so much. And good afternoon, board members. Really appreciate you joining us. I'm going to share my slideshow in a second, but I want to tee up for you that I'm going to be presenting about a couple of efforts that we did in concert to kind of improve and where we could streamline our multifamily programs. One of those items, the qualified allocation plan, will require your consideration and vote, hopefully, to recommend it to the board at the board's February meeting, and then the board would then recommend it to the governor. And in the end, the governor has to sign it for it to go into effect and become an official document. So not everything that I'm sharing will require a motion. That one will. And once I'm done sharing information and answering questions, we can switch back to the PDF, Laura or Sam, with that motion on it and that stuff. So I'm going to share my slides. Can you allow me to share, Sam? Is that a possibility?
Let me see.
If not, we can just put the PowerPoint up there. I just prefer the.
Laura,
I
you
mean,
might need to do that.
I know I can share, but I'm trying to figure out if I can get you to share.
You should be able to.
Oh, yes, I can. Thank you so much.
Thank
Great.
you.
Thanks, Nathan. Okay. So again, I've got updates on our multifamily programs. So when we say multifamily, it really kind of means two things. It means rental, but it almost always means it's multiplexes. We do once in a while fund maybe single family rental or small duplexes, but typically we're doing 25 units or more when we're funding rental. That's just our programs are suited to that scale, and really larger scale works even better with our programs. So I want to make sure I give you all some background on the low-income housing tax credit, because it is one of KHC's, if not the most in demand, it's one of our most in demand resources. We get either 2-to-1 asks for the credits we have, or 3-to-1, depending on the year. So it is very much in demand, very competitive. It's not our only resource. Some developers would have you think it was, but it is very much in demand. And I'll even show a calculation here in a little bit that kind of gives you a sense as to why. This is a program through the IRS and through Treasury. So this is not a HUD program. It's a tax credit program where, based on our population and a federal kind of set of numbers, every year KHC is allocated a certain amount of low-income housing tax credits that we then get to allocate, if you will, to projects across the state. Developers work with what are called tax credit syndicators, and often banks, to find the investors that buy the credits. It's basically like if you put $1 into low-income housing, you might get, let me flip this. If you put, let's say, 85 cents into low-income housing, you might get $1 off your federal tax liability, right? So you're buying money effectively. It's a great discount on your federal tax liability. It also comes with some depreciation and other stuff that I honestly don't fully understand, but it also allows banks in particular to get their Community Reinvestment Act credits that they have to get. Wherever they have depositors, they have to be showing that they are investing also. So it serves a number of purposes. The tax credit is taken over a 10-year period, but the property really has a 30-year compliance period with us. So we watch these properties for 30 years. Our folks who do asset management, who watch their financials, and our compliance folks who look at, are they still leasing to the tenants within the right income ranges? Is it physically being kept up? All that kind of stuff. So the tax credit program requires, for the 9% credits, we have to issue what's called a qualified allocation plan. Every state HFA, like KHC, has to put out what's called the QAP. And it's kind of the document that governs how we will award credits to projects. Basically, what's the competition? What's the scoring? What are the priorities? That kind of stuff. So it's a very important document. It's mandated. We have to do it. In the beginning, we did it every single year, which does not give our developers a whole lot of runway to know what the reigning scoring and priorities are. Now, more recently, we have gone to a 2-year QAP. And what you'll see, or if you've already looked ahead, is we propose to go to a 3-year QAP. This does a couple of things. It gives us as an organization that runway. We know what the rules are, we know what it's going to be, but it lets developers and local communities that want to attract projects, they know what the scoring is for 3 full years. It gives them time to get a project that would score really well. Okay, so I want to give you a sample tax credit calculation so you can understand why this is so in demand. So effectively, you take whatever tax credits KHC allocates or awards to a project, that gets multiplied times 10 years because it's taken 10 years. And then you multiply it times the pricing. Pricing is variable. It goes up and it goes down. We're using 80 cents, which is a little lower than a lot of what we're seeing, but I wanted a round number to make it easy. And then there's what percentage the investor owns of the project, which is typically 99.99. So you also have to multiply it times that. So if we were to award a project $1 million in credits, then you take it times 10 times 80 cents per credit. So again, you're paying 80 cents to get $1 of federal tax credit, written off for your liability, times that 99.99%. That translates to $7.99 million in equity that is not debt. That's why this is so valuable. So that's equity that stays in the project, definitely for 10 years, often for 15. It might exit after that, but it is not debt. So it never has to be repaid, but the owner might decide to leave or sell their part of the interest. But I just want to convey to you all, that's why there is a lot of competition for this. That's why when I tell you the process we went through to talk with all of our partners, we spent a lot of time because it is considered so very valuable. I mean, non-debt equity is really hard to come by at these levels. When pricing is good, this program can cover about 70% of the development costs for a multifamily project without that translating to debt, which is how these projects can then have lower rents. They're not radically low rents, but they're lower rents, and it's income limited, right? So the folks who can live there cannot make above a certain income, and the rents are not allowed to be higher than certain levels. I'll pause there in case someone has questions. I'm really just trying to lay groundwork so it's clear why this is a really desired resource from KHC. All right, I'll keep going. So we just completed and announced a funding round for our 9% low-income housing tax credits. We just awarded these. We notified the developers in January. We announced all the awards publicly in February. So this just happened. And just to give you all a sense, in terms of the applications, we got 31 applications. We funded 15 of them, right? So more than half didn't get funded. Because we just didn't have enough credits. The asks were for $35 million in tax credits. We had $15.9 million to award. So what you can see is it's a 2-to-1 ratio, roughly, of asks to awards. And what's worth really noting is that our developers spend between $50,000 and $100,000 right now putting together an application. So it's a significant amount of time and money just to apply, only to have half of them not get awarded. So this is just giving you a sense of the resources that we invested in this most recent round. That top row is the low income housing tax credit, LIHTC, LIHTC for short. So you'll see we actually had 16 million available. Again, we had 35 million requested and we awarded 15.9. We sometimes keep a little bit in reserve in case a project hits an unexpected road bump or environmental cost and they need to ask us for a little more in credits. So we often don't award every single credit because we want to keep a few in reserve. Not many, but just a little. We also have some HUD Home Investment Partnership dollars going into this. We have Kentucky Affordable Housing Trust Fund dollars and then Kentucky Rural Housing Trust Fund dollars going into this funding round. So the bold over in the right is what we actually awarded from each of those sources in this most recent round. Just giving you a sense of the distribution. We did have projects in every single congressional district. That is not a mandate. We just kind of like to look at that to make sure we're having some good distribution. I will say, to our surprise, a lot of Western Kentucky projects seemed to score well and had some local participation, which gave them really good scoring. So you'll see 6 in District 1. This is just the distribution of the projects in just this round. This isn't over time, but just this round where projects got awarded. So it's rural and urban. We do pretty much guarantee that Jefferson County, Fayette County, and Northern Kentucky will each get 1 project if they have an eligible project that applies. We have a separate pool for them, and then the rest of the state competes. We don't want our smaller counties trying to compete with Louisville and Lexington and Northern Kentucky. That's just the congressional districts in case you weren't sure which ones were which. In terms of how we distribute the credits in this most recent round, I want to make it clear, because we're maintaining this in our next qualified allocation plan, we have a real thumb on the scale for getting new supply versus rehabbing existing units. Please do not hear me as saying that we don't need to rehab units. We do, but we desperately need to get more built all across Kentucky. And so we are only allowing 10% of our credits to be used for rehabbing existing supply of affordable housing. 90% are targeted to new construction in those 3 big urban areas and in the balance of state. So this is just giving you a sense of that kind of breakdown. Okay, I'm going to pause there because that's just about the round we just did. We've made those announcements. We've talked to the developers. We always have a period where they're allowed to kind of appeal or ask questions, and we've publicly announced that. So wanting to just give you all that sense of what just happened. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to our approach to streamlining a number of our kind of guiding documents that dictate multifamily development. Again, first being that qualified allocation plan, or QAP. So this is saying how in the next 3 years, which is our proposal, are we going to allocate the low-income housing tax credits, they're called 9% credits that are so very in demand. Our aim, and we have shared this with our partners when we've met with them, is to build more units, to build units faster, and to mitigate escalating cost increases, because we have seen for the last few years since the pandemic, costs just go up at a rate we cannot maintain. We are seeing that temper, thank goodness, but we've got to get more supply built. So we sought a lot of partner input. In the past, we would normally do a handful of group developer forums, in person or virtual. And I got to be honest, a lot of folks don't talk, and it feels like the same 5 folks do talk, and we don't necessarily get the rich interaction and input that we might want. So we took a different approach this year. We met first one-on-one with 13 different development companies, and with a coalition that represents many of our affordable housing developers. We met with 7 units of government. They were cities, counties, and even some area development districts. We met with 7 housing nonprofits and coalitions of nonprofits. And then we met with some funders and bankers to ask them, and some tax credit syndicators. And I have to say, we got just a much more set of rich feedback, right? They're much more willing when we're one-on-one and we say, look, you're not going to hurt our feelings. We're here to hear what you need us to be considering. It was just really productive. Not always easy to hear what they said, but it was very, very productive. So the result is that there really were a lot of areas of consensus about what might need to be modified or changed. We came up with 13 actionable items and have kind of a list of future things that we will consider. We really couldn't implement all changes at once, but we've got this kind of like list to keep for future years to consider implementing. Okay, so here are the key changes. I want to make it clear, we're really not looking to radically change the QAP from the last 2-year QAP, but we do want to shift from a 2-year cycle to a 3-year cycle. So that means this new QAP would be effective from January next year through December of 2029. That would overlap the election of a new governor. And so it would give us that consistency and then allow the new governor, they would sign the next 3-year QAP. So that is a change. We're honestly not aware of many states that do a 3-year QAP. And while some of our developers like the idea, I have to say, I think developers are all gamblers, and some of them would rather get the shot every year of getting scoring that would work better for them. We think we're really trying to value local communities bringing land or dollars or waiving fees. We're trying to give that scoring, and we feel like local communities have got to have time and understand that this scoring is in place for several years to be able to bring things to the table. They might not be able to do it right away, but maybe the next year or the next year they could. And so we feel like that scoring has got to be consistent if we want more local governments, local philanthropies, or businesses to be part of these projects. Okay, so then the distribution of the credits, like what uses we're going to put them to, we are still going to keep this distribution of 10% for existing supply, which is rehab or preservation of existing affordable units. There are some projects that are smaller, they need to go this route, and we want to allow for that. We're going to keep this existing set aside. We're going to now prioritize. So the thing that will be different is that we're going to prioritize the preservation of existing projects that have rent assistance, because new rent assistance is almost impossible to get. So we want to make sure that rent assisted units do not fall into such disrepair that we lose them from our portfolio. We always prioritize the property that is in most need of repair. So that will be a factor, but we're adding rent assistance as part of that. So again, it's only 10% of our credits. The remaining 90% is going to be for new supply, building new units. But we are keeping this, and we're adding the priority of rent-assisted properties. And hi, Kathy. I'm glad you could join us. We've also made a change. We had a scoring item that was standalone, was called land donation. And we basically gave a lot of points if you could get your land donated by a local government, a philanthropy, or if you just donated the land to the project yourself. We're not getting rid of it, but we are tweaking it a little bit, and we are folding it into an overall category that we call below market resources. We're basically trying to incentivize projects to bring other dollars to the project to make it work so that they're not using as much of our tax credits, and we could hopefully make them go further. We also want to reward communities where there are businesses, philanthropies, local governments, other entities that are participating, economic development, that are materially participating in these projects. So the upshot of this is that we will award points if the development budget shows no more than $5,000 in the cost line item for acquisition. And that can be fee simple ownership or it can be a 99-year lease. It doesn't have to be outright ownership. We'll look at options. We're going to fold this into another scoring element, and I'll show that to you. So it's going to be folded into what's called permanent below market sources. This also is already a scoring element in the current QAP. We're just taking land donation, and instead of it being separate, we're going to move that into this, and the value of any of these will relate to your points that you get for these resources. So these are just examples of the resources that we would give you points for if you were able to bring them to your project. And they also include any kind of loan that's at or below 4% interest. That's new. I think before we had it at 2 or 3%, so we've raised that a little bit. If it's at least for 20 years and doesn't have unreasonable fees. So we're even going to count loans as being a below market resource. We do propose to increase the developer fee that's allowed. The limit used to be 1.2 million. We're now increasing it to 1.8 million. We have not increased this in over 10 years. And we are hearing from a lot of our developers that it's making it, it not pencil as well, because in the end, your developer fee is your last contingency line, and it's often expected that they defer a significant amount of their developer fee into the future. Kathy, go ahead. You are on mute.
I just was going to say, why wasn't it a percentage? Like you can't be more than 15% or you have to be under 10%. How do they figure that?
Yeah, now this is the cap. I think it is a percentage up to the cap. I believe that's how it works, right? But we do have an upper limit for it. We wouldn't want to have just a percentage because that could, there's already a perverse incentive in credits for costs to get too high, and we don't want to do that also with a developer fee. We're also proposing to raise the maximum credit cap per developer, not per project, but to allow a developer to potentially apply for 2 projects from $1.5 million in credits to $1.8 million. Now, remember, we just showed the calculation where $1 million in credits could translate to $7.9 million in equity. So you could see where, 1.8 million could be split into 2 projects and do 2 sizable projects with the equity that generates. We also are proposing, so in recognition that some of our scoring is what you would call blind scoring, where projects are just ranked against each other, so you don't necessarily know how you're going to fare. Along with the fact that, as I said, our developers might spend $50,000 to $100,000 applying, we're now going to add a step in the process where it's called a pre-application. So you submit to us some general information about your project, enough for us to do your preliminary scoring, and we will publish how your project ranks against the other pre-applications so that the developer can decide, do I want to proceed forward with all of the cost of putting in a full application? So I want to make sure that makes sense. We're trying to reduce the unknowns and the risk of spending a lot of money only to be told, no, you're not getting the project, and give them a sense early on of how they would score against one another. I think this is a really good thing. Many states do this, not all, but we think it's going to be a little more work for us, at least on the front end. It may mean we have to do a full review on fewer projects on the back end, because some might decide, I'm not going to bother, I'm not going to spend the money if I don't think I have a shot. And then in a little bit, we'll talk about the changes to our minimum design standards that could help with costs. So the QAP, the Qualified Allocation Plan, does not really speak to our tax exempt bond financing, which brings with it what are called 4% tax credits, which bring less equity. It's a similar calculation as what I showed y'all before, but it brings less equity to the deal, but still valuable. But I wanted to make sure you all knew that part of these conversations, while they were aimed at being focused on 9% tax credits, they inevitably, our partners wanted to talk about our bond financing. 10 years ago, we had a hard time getting our developers to use bond financing to build multifamily, and now it is oversubscribed. Now we run out typically every year of tax exempt bond availability for multifamily. So I just want to let you all know, we spent a lot of time talking with them, and their biggest ask was that there be predictability about rounds of funding for tax exempt bond financing that lets them access the 4% credit. So we listened to them. We also had the benefit of being given some leftover bond cap from the state, and we are able to commit to doing, ideally, every year a bond round of, at least for the next 2 years, of at least $100 million. So we're able to tell them that so they can plan projects. We're very hopeful that we'll be able to keep this consistency, because it's a really vital resource, and it's not as competitive as the 9% credit, but it's becoming very competitive. And we are oversubscribed, which is a good thing. You want to use your resources, but it also means, there's demand for it. So here are the steps to date. Again, in September and October, we met September through October, we met with tons and tons of partners, so many meetings one-on-one. In January, we presented the results of those and the recommendations of staff to our executive directors. Then we had a webinar to share with our development partners and nonprofits, like, here are the things we are planning to change. Here's what we're thinking about. Last chance to give us feedback. Then we did our legally required public hearing on February 10th. We are in that, well, today ends that, or yesterday ended that comment period for that public hearing. And then we're presenting to you all. So that's where we are now. And then the next steps would be, if you all recommend this to the larger board, then it would go to the board, then it would go to the governor's office. And then in May of, that should be 26, we would open up the tax credit round so that they could apply in August and we could make the awards in January. A clock starts on these awards, so awarding as early in the year as possible gives our developers the most time to get their projects done before the IRS deadlines end up. This has been a long time ask of our partners that we award as early as possible so that they can get development going and be able to meet the IRS deadlines. Anthony, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that it's like a 2-year clock that they have.
Right. Once the project closes on its equity, then they will have 2 years to place in service.
That means they got to be leasing up. And so that's why we want to award in January. And that's why, so we want to get the application out and then be able to make the award so that in January they're ready to get going. So I will pause there because next I'm going to have Joe talk about the minimum design standards. Anybody have questions thus far? Yeah, go ahead.
And it's because I always put it in context with everything else. The 4%, the bond, as I'm sure I didn't understand correctly because it was a long time ago, but because of economy of scale, like the more units you're doing, the more useful that 4% is, that tends to make up some of what's needed in cities. Because if you do 50 units as opposed to 6 units, the 4% has more. You're absolutely meaning.
Yeah.
And then I want to figure out this, distribution of all our funding. And then the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, we are pushing to, and I hope we get it, additional fees. Are we keeping the mandatory allocation regardless of where the money comes from? Between
what do you mean?
Urban and rural?
That's in statute, so I think it would have to be. It's that 40% has to go rural. That's what's in statute.
Well, it's in a statute, and if they pass another statute increasing the funding source, I'm just asking that.
I haven't seen any draft legislation that would change that dynamic.
Okay.
But it's 40% rural, 60. It's a minimum of 40% rural is all that the statute currently says.
Right, and I'm not necessarily fighting it. I'm just trying to make sure I understand. And then a state, any chance we're gonna get that, and any chance we're gonna get a state low-income housing tax credit, and will it conform to the QAP?
I am hopeful and prepared to be disappointed. I really don't know. It's really hard to say. I've never seen so much housing legislation get proposed, excuse me. But I really do not have a strong sense of what's going to make it across the line.
Okay.
We're kind of in the middle of it all, and it feels like forest or trees instead of forest. I just don't have a sense of what's going to advance.
Okay. Can we have a discussion? So I'm going to ask about everything after the legislative session, so that when we look at what KHC is doing where, with all our sources that are a little more known, that would be interesting to me.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. And just to touch on your point, Kathy, about bonds versus 9% credits, you are exactly right. The bonds, tax exempt bonds, which come with 4% credits, really only work. It's not just that they work better. They only really work for larger scale projects. So it's either where you're doing a portfolio of scattered, developments, or you're doing a very large scale development. And when I say large scale, I mean 100 units or more. Really, even 50 is kind of small for bonds. There's just a lot of soft costs with issuing bonds and all that kind of stuff that you need a larger project to be able to absorb that. It just tends to work better. It's working because we have so many developers who are utilizing it. Where it's difficult is to get extremely low income targeted units, but that's difficult all over. All right, any other questions before I hand it over to Joe to talk about multifamily design standards? So in addition to looking at the QAP and our guidelines, where we're really trying to figure out how can we streamline, how can we make things work better, Joe Pritchard, who runs multifamily asset compliance and is over our design and construction review team, has led a parallel effort to look at the requirements we have for what gets built. We have minimum design standards that kind of say, like, what do you have to have built, what kind of windows, the grounds, all that kind of stuff. And so we have taken a hard look at where can we streamline those, and we've listened to a lot of partners on that. So Joe, I'll advance the slides for you.
Okay.
But you're on.
Okay. Well, first of all, thanks everybody for having me around today. And secondly, sorry about the camera thing. That's what I look like. So if you're curious, actually, that's probably a pretty decent picture of me because that was a while ago. So just that's who I am. So thanks for having me. Wendy, go ahead to the next one. You've seen this slide before. We have the same goals Wendy had with the QAP and the multifamily guidelines. Build more units, build them faster, and try to keep the cost down. Cost per unit nationwide is pretty ridiculous right now. I had heard cost as high as $750,000 in Chicago per unit. Now, we're nowhere near that, but we don't want to get anywhere near that either. So that's why we're trying to do some of these things. Go ahead, Wendy.
Go ahead, Kathy.
Can I ask, how come number 4 isn't about energy, environmental safety?
Well, we already have a lot of elements in our design guidelines related to that. We've always, and universal design for if people are or become disabled. So we're not saying these are our only goals. These are the goals we're overlaying on what we've already been doing year to year.
Yeah, I'll go over some of that, Kathy, as we go through this. And if I don't answer any questions, just lay them on me. So the background and intent was, it's not on the slide here, but I inherited the design and construction review team, the DCR team, January 2025. And when I did that, they did not have a manager at the time. So the first thing I had to do was hire a manager for that team, and I hired Bob Dishinger. He's done a fabulous job. He came on, he started a little later, like March is when he started. But when Bob got in, the first thing he and I did was look at the minimum design standards and say, it's been a while since we've updated these. So we started going through them one by one. We got the single family minimum design standards completed. Those, actually, they should be published, if not tomorrow, next week. They'll go out, final publication. And multifamily is nearing completion. I'm supposed to have the final, I guess, rough draft to me tomorrow. And then we'll put that out for a comment period. Like Wendy said, they're going to do the other things. Our aim was to alleviate the pain points and cost inflators while maintaining KHC's structural and accessibility standards. Whenever I got that crew, I asked Dale Spicer, he was one of the senior guys at the time, before we had Bob on as manager. And I asked Dale, why in the world do we have minimum design standards? Why don't we just let them build the code? And Dale had actually come to KHC from the HBC, where he was helping to write Kentucky code. And Dale told me, Joe, building code will get you a D+ house. KHC standards will get that closer to a B+. And that's always made a lot of sense to me. And I have that tattooed on the inside of my eyelids, so I will never forget it. So that's why we do minimum design. Now, Bob, when he came along, he had a quote too that I really clung to, and that's let's let the smart people do what the smart people do. Basically, why don't we have our standards, but instead of dictating every single thing, let's let them figure it out. These folks are architects, civil engineers, those type of people. We want what we want out of them, but we don't need to stand in the way of progress here. So go ahead, Wendy. The process for redoing these was a lot like what Wendy did with the QAP and the multifamily guidelines. I've personally went through every standard on my own. I've got a little bit of a background in that sort of thing and inspections and building. So I went through and just made questions. Why do we do this? What is this for? Can we alleviate this? And just had them give me the story of why we did things the way we did things. Bob did the same thing. He went to his staff. They all did the same thing. And together, we kind of came up with a rough draft to work off of. Then we conducted surveys of the developers. We met with them one-on-one with Wendy and Terry. And we kind of incorporated all that into a second rough draft of our minimum design standards where feasible. And now we're at this final bullet point to where we're about to put it out for final comment and then hopefully publish soon. Go ahead. And so I'm just going to give you guys, I don't have a lot more to put, but I'm going to give you just some kind of hit the highlights, I guess. The first thing of a summary of changes, we're going to hit the highlights. So we erased some redundant Kentucky Building Code language. What we didn't want to happen is for us to mandate something, and let's say it was our 2020 minimum design standards. Everything was working great. We hadn't updated them. But then a year or two later, Kentucky changed their building code, and there was something 180 degrees different where you either weren't going to meet our minimum design or weren't going to meet building code. We wanted to get rid of that sort of stuff. And so we took out language that was in the building code and just kind of refer to now current Kentucky building code instead of duplicating that. That cleans it up a lot, actually. We eliminated parking requirements. This sounds shocking. But most local jurisdictions have parking requirements anyhow. And so it seemed a little crazy for us to be saying, well, the local jurisdiction has that, but we also have our own. We're just going to allow the local jurisdictions to take care of that. And the market, if there's a place that doesn't have local jurisdiction overseeing their parking, well, the market will do that because nobody's going to want to rent an apartment if they can't park their car there. So that's where we're going to let the smart people do what the smart people do.
This is Kathy. I don't think so. I think if someone's desperate for affordable housing, they'll accept a lot.
Kathy, let me add to the bankers and syndicators that are involved in tax credit and bond projects are only going to allow the amount of parking that the market study or that past experience will allow. What we have been seeing is where Jefferson County is willing to lower their parking requirement and ours is higher. And we had times where we told them, you have to build a bigger parking lot instead of being able to build units there. It's also keeping keeping projects from being able to be located in the urban core because they might not be able to have, I never had dedicated parking for the first 10 years of my adult life. I parked on the street. Now that was in exchange for something that was affordable and close to a job or a university. It is a big trend across all housing, but particularly affordable housing, to not be mandating so much parking that you are limiting where stuff can get built and you're increasing costs.
I know. And parking now determined by local jurisdictions that would cover all of that. I'm talking about the instance that Bob just said. Joe. That Joe just said of where there are no requirements.
So I can speak to that a little bit.
So that we do protect the families where there.
What I'm saying is the tax credit investor will not let them build units that will not lease up, right? And that will not perform well in the market.
My experience is people will say yes to anything to get into subsidized housing.
Well, so do you want more housing or you want more parking?
I'm only talking about the area where it isn't local, where there
It's
isn't
still
local
a valid
jurisdiction.
question. Do you want more housing or more parking?
That's a false dichotomy. I want
Well, you're assuming they
housing
have
that
land.
serves the needs of low-income people. That's what I want. I don't see it as I either get the house or I get the parking.
We do too. We do too. You know that, right? What we're saying is that us overlaying parking requirements when you have a bank, a tax credit syndicator, a developer and owner who's got to lease up, and often a local government overlay, not always, that you could let those drivers determine how much parking. The places where it's most expensive is where they're going to try to get solutions that don't require as much parking. In rural areas, land's not as expensive. It's still very expensive.
Okay.
I would rather get more housing.
Well, you're saying, I'm totally agreeing to let the local jurisdictions, because if they want to lower the parking, they know what public transit, blah, blah, blah. But you're saying out where there's no governance at all about parking, you're just going to leave it to everybody, to those people.
We are going to do an
So
experiment.
little housing, people will say yes to virtually everything. And then perhaps be very isolated.
And it will make
we'll find out.
It'll make it cheaper to build because they won't have to spend as much money on surface lots, you know?
I find it very unfortunate, but I find that the first asset that anybody acquires, regardless of income, is one that depreciates the second they take ownership. And that's because we have very bad transportation. Well,
totally agree.
Okay, I'm not going to fight it because we'll see over the course of
Here's
time.
a way to look at it. It also would allow a town like I live in, Lebanon, Kentucky, to take our currently vacant courthouse and make it affordable apartments. Since there's no parking requirement, it could work. With our current parking requirement, you can't do it.
Okay. All right. And then I'm going to ask if anybody consulted, for instance, Kentucky Resource Council when those stringent energy efficiency regulations are being deleted.
They're not being deleted only for HUD. When HUD money is in it, those are still required. I'll let Joe talk about that because he hasn't gotten to that yet.
So what happened, Kathy, is that when they did the last minimum design, they jumped the gun a little bit. They got super progressive on where they wanted the regulations to be, so much now that we're having mold issues in some of these places. And so, yeah, they're energy efficient. That's great, but everybody's sick in them because they're full of mold. And so,
I understand that.
So we've backed those off a little bit where we could. Now, when it's HUD money, HUD has since essentially caught up to our minimum design. And now if it has HUD money, then you have to go by, I hate to get technical, but it's the 2021 IECC is what they have to go by. So they'll still have to do that. But even so, that's not really our regulation. That's a HUD regulation that we'll be checking for. But
we still have energy efficiency. Joe, maybe you want to touch on what we do for energy efficiency.
There's definitely energy efficiency. We're going to allow res check and different HERS ratings and that sort of thing to get some energy efficiency out of it. But there's a bit of so we got to pick which battle we're going to fight. Are we going to fight the energy efficiency battle, the parking battle, or the housing battle? And so what we're trying to do here, since we're a housing agency, is fight the housing battle is the way I viewed it. And so that's where a lot of this is coming from.
Well, I fight the occupant battle.
Well, let me share. We still have energy efficiency standards. Again, res check or HERS. We still have that.
I simply was asking if, who reviewed these? Was it only bankers and developers, or was there also people who have a great deal of expertise in energy efficiency agreeing with you that these are things that could be taken out and still deliver something that is affordable in its energy cost to the people who
Bob Dishinger, our manager, is actually a LEED certified trainer. that he trained on energy efficiency before he,
Okay.
that was one of his roles. Bob knows it well. And we did, so that the units themselves, we're going in deeper than what I thought we were going to, but the
Well,
units
that's all right. You
themselves
and I
are,
can take it up some outside of this, because I probably would love to get a list of what it is so I can ask the people.
well, I can do
that
you
I
better. I
trust.
can just give you the whole kit and caboodle if you want and see what you think of our minimum design. If you want that, you can just read through
That's
all
good.
of it.
That's good.
And then if you want to get, well, that's fine, Kathy. We'll see what we can do.
I do think it's really important to point out that in these meetings that we had with developers, some of whom are nonprofit, some are for-profit, they talked about the standards that we had leading to repeated mold issues in the units because they are so tight. And a lot of tenants, even though you shouldn't turn your HVAC totally off, turn it off to save money, and then they get mold issues. It's just a repeated problem.
One of my first major cases here in Louisville was I represented the tenants union in Beecher because they had put everything so tight but left porous bricks, and it was like being in New Orleans. I mean, I understand the issue.
Yeah.
And I'm also saying I don't know that this isn't the best, greatest thing since sliced bread. I just want to know who reviewed it that I also think are experts and who could talk about in terms of cost to the tenant. That's all. And you may have already talked to them. They may say this is great and have no problem. I'm only asking for the chance to look it over. That's all I'm asking for.
We did keep in our minimum design about Energy Star is going away. I don't know if y'all knew that, but it's being sunsetted. So what we put in here is Energy Star or equivalent, and a lot of appliances and that sort of thing in the units. Now in common areas, and I'll get to this on the next slide, but on common areas, that was one that I wouldn't have thought, having to pay for a water heater in the common area, the electric would be that big of a source of contention. But all the developers asked that we take that, and I thought, well, if it's not charging the tenant anymore, then I don't have a problem with it. It's on the owners. We removed references to outdated documents and incorporated them directly into our MDS. Specifically, we had a document called Universal Design, which was an accessibility document. We just took some of those things from the Universal Design and put in here. And now what we're doing, I don't know if y'all know Liz Fust or not. Liz is confined to a wheelchair, and she's an attorney. And I've spoken with Liz, and what we're doing is a Kentucky Housing kind of accessibility recommendations is what we're gonna call it. We're not going to mandate those, but what we are going to do is work with her and put our stamp of approval on it. That way, anybody in the state that wants to build an accessible home or an accessible unit, they've got a document they can go by. And so we've been working with Liz and her architect on that, and they are supposed to get me a finalized copy. Well, their final version of it. It'd be the end of this month, early March.
And Joe, if I can interject, all units have to have certain hallway widths and doorway widths, no matter what. So it's visitable, and if you became disabled in your home, you can be in that. This extra set is if you want to be meeting a higher standard or you're building the house for someone who already has a disability, this is an extra set of standards.
That's right.
I just want to make sure that's clear.
That's right. But they already have things like blocking in the bathroom for railing. They've got levered handles, that sort of stuff. We just took that and built into our minimum design standards. We did add a section for modular home compliance in here. The modular, I guess, wasn't as upfront of a news item whenever they had written the last one. So we incorporated that into these minimum designs. Wendy, you can go next. We allowed for windows other than just solid vinyl. We removed a requirement for medicine cabinets. We removed a KCMA certification for cabinets to allow for other certifications. One of them is ANSI, and I don't know if that means anything to you all, but ANSI is easier to obtain than KCMA. And essentially, both of those two items right there are going to bring the cost per unit down. Medicine cabinets, nobody really used them anyhow, honestly. Like I said, we removed the Energy Star requirement for common area appliances. And then I think this is the last one, Wendy, is we removed communications requirements such as telephone, cable, and internet hookups. The market's now going to drive those. They will put them in. We won't be checking for it. Telephone and cable, telephone especially, they were having to run this cable and spend the time and the effort doing it, and no one ever hooked it up. And so that's a kind of summary of the major changes. Of course, there's other things we changed, but that's the highlights.
As you do that, is there a requirement that that place be in a place where anyone could get a telephone? Like if there's a tower or whatever. I mean, if you're not requiring, you know, aren't there parts of Kentucky where people can't get internet?
A lot of them are using satellite in that case.
Yeah. So is there at least a requirement that there
is not. There is not. We would like to, so maybe a little bit of this is experiment. We would like to trust our developers to build housing that's going to work. I'm not saying it's going to be perfect, but if we try to set a requirement, it's always a moving target when it comes to telecommunications. Okay. We're always behind. And now we've been requiring all this cabling that nobody uses.
I don't disagree with you here. I'm not saying you need to require that, but just, is this an area that's just no reception, no ability? Okay. All right. You want to try
what you all will hear is we're trying to keep good standards, energy efficiency, good quality construction, and still accessibility. We're trying to figure out how we can get costs not to keep escalating. And it is a real struggle. We have almost entirely in the past moved in the direction of adding more and more and more requirements, which is going to end up with us getting a few great units, but not enough units. So
the units you get are more expensive than they had to be to help somebody have a home. Okay. There are other states that have no minimum designs at all and just go by code. One is Oklahoma, and the only thing I can figure is they're going to get blown away with a tornado soon anyhow. I don't know why they have no minimum design, but they have none. But most have some, and I think we're pretty good to work with. We're pretty easy to work with. But if there was anything we could do to try to keep the costs down a little bit and let those tax credits stretch out as much as they can, that's what we're trying to do while towing the line of having a good place for our tenants. Now, Kathy, my background, you probably don't know, is I spent about 15 years dealing with our Section 8 inspection group. I was an inspector for 10 years, and then I was their manager for 5 years. And so it's very important to me to make sure that the folks we serve have a good place to live.
With KHC? Were you
KHC.
the guys who won the award for your setting up appointments? I remember that.
That's right. That was me. That was me when I was a manager.
I'm sure I congratulated you.
You did. And thank you very much. So I'm very passionate about making sure our folks have a good, safe place to live. I wouldn't approve these changes if I didn't believe it with my heart that it wouldn't lend to them having a better experience out there and helping more people. It's not just bowing down to the developers. That couldn't be further from my heart. I promise you that.
I think it's worth the board also knowing that Joe's team, they look at plans on the front end for multifamily and for single family, home ownership development. They look at the plans on the front end to make sure they're meeting minimum design, and then they inspect during and at the end of construction. So we have a really high level of tending to the quality of what's getting built with our funds.
And our inspection team they're the highest trained, best inspection team in the state, hands down. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you all.
Thanks, Joe. So with that, again, we've talked about really three things: the qualified allocation plan, our multifamily guidelines in general, and then Joe shared with you our minimum design standard changes. The only piece of that that requires action or seeks action is around the qualified allocation plan. So we are asking the committee to consider a motion to recommend to the overall board of directors the adoption of our 2027 through 2029 qualified allocation plan for 9% tax credits.
I'll make the motion.
I'll second that motion.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed?
Thank you so much.
Mr. Bonderschmidt, you want to talk to us about the 2026 Q2 allocation plan update?
Will do. Yes. My name is Kendrick Bonderschmidt. I'm the Managing Director of Corporate Planning and Accountability. And we put together what's called the allocation plan, which is different than the qualified allocation plan every year. This is a outlay of what we think we are going to do on the programmatic side, KHC, and try to make everything sing together. This is through Q2. This is how much we've done so far this fiscal year. And we'll start off with our fees and grant admin projections. We'll begin at the very bottom of this table here on row LL. I'll just note that we've brought in $21 million in fees and grant admin so far this year, which is 53% of what we projected. There are within that there are underperforming lines and overperforming lines. I will draw your attention to a couple of programs in our homelessness section. The lines V and W are some of our COC programs. During the government shutdown, we did make some decisions to hold off on spending in a couple of areas in order to preserve some grant funds in case they never showed up again, depending on what we thought was going to happen. Some of that activity will continue to take place this fiscal year, and some of that will be delayed. It didn't happen this fiscal year, and it'll happen in the future. Those specific programs, lines lines V and W do have multi-year grant terms to them. So we do have some time to spend those funds. Same thing with BB, our unsheltered HMIS grant program. Some of our overperforming sections is our loan servicing portfolio on line G and H, at the top there, and our home ownership portfolio, line B. I'm trying to keep this brief, but if are there any questions about the grant and fee, you'll also hear some of this with Tracy's financial update next week. All right, hearing none, we can go on to our, the second page is simply a graphical representation of that same information. You can see these are based on percentages. You can see where some of those fee and grant admin sections are ahead of schedule and some which are behind schedule. Again, the same information as the previous page. Moving on to our third page. So now we're getting into the nitty-gritty of how the program funds are spent across the corporation. This is organized by program area. We'll begin with our energy programs at the top. Our weatherization program got slightly more money than we anticipated. It is the LIHEAP program on line C that I would like to draw attention to. If we think way back to where we were last May when we approved the allocation plan, we did not think we were going to get our whole panoply of LIHEAP for the year, let alone of the second amount that we normally get in December. And I'm proud to say that or I'm happy to say that we did receive what is a normal amount of LIHEAP for a year. However, that is blowing our percentages out of the water. We have 474% of what we thought we were going to get back in May when we were estimating very conservatively. Moving on from energy programs, I'm going to give you a sense of both in housing contract administration, HCA, and the multifamily section. You're going to see a lot of holes. We do a lot of our activity in Q3 and Q4 with a lot of our gap funds. Those are funds that come from HUD, take some time to get those in the door and then to award them. So you'll see a lot of holes. Then that activity always has taken place during Q3 and Q4 mostly. Beginning within Housing Contract Administration, I will draw your attention to line F. We have made our about half of our emergency solution grants funds were awarded prior to the end of the calendar year, and we've awarded the rest of them since. I'll then move on to multifamily finance. We have put out just under $139 million in tax-exempt bond awards based on the closing of those projects this fiscal year so far. And you'll see in line P, you'll see that we have awarded $11,750,000 in home funds to multifamily projects. $5 million of that was program income associated with the home program that we were able to plug some holes in some projects or in the fall, which allowed those projects to continue to be viable going forward. We did not anticipate having those funds available last May when we put the allocation plan together, but we were able to make those funds available and make those projects whole. As Wendy mentioned earlier, if you looked at line T, we did save a little bit of our tax credits for a little bit of plugging some holes in projects, and that is where the $3.5 million or 26% of our allocation came from. Looking at line V, as John mentioned, we have produced $305 million in loan production so far this year on a goal of $500 million, so we're ahead of schedule. And that tacks nicely with our down payment assistance fund paid for by the HAF program, which is also around 60% or $14.6 million. And then I'll draw your attention down to the tenant assistance programs, AA and BB. Those programs generally run kind of like a metronome every year. We can anticipate where the HAP is going to, where the housing assistance payments are going to pay out. And right now we're hovering at 50%, just as expected for both these programs. So page 4 and 5 are graphical representations of that same information. Again, the LIHEAP chart kind of blew the percentages out of the water, so we separated the energy programs out for that. And then the remainder of the programs are listed on the 5th page. Finally, looking at page 6, this is the same information that was on the previous tables. However, it's organized by fund type, which gives you a little bit of a sense of where we are in the fiscal year awarding our funds. You'll see that we have not made any awards out of our Affordable Housing Trust Fund, lines A through D. We've always planned on making those awards in Q3 and Q4. And we're still waiting to make additional awards out of our home program, and that is our homeownership production, which also goes well with our Choto Reserve funds on lines H and I, and additional awards made on line J towards tenant-based rental assistance. We can generally make about $2 million in awards there. Finally, I'll draw your attention to the Housing Assistance Fund, a fund that we have here at the corporation that funds our counseling program, which we're at 38% on the year on line Q. And again, this also funds our down payment assistance program, which we've, as I mentioned earlier, $14.6 million on line P, 60% of our production goal for the year. All right, I know I went through that kind of fast for time. Again, the last page is a graphical representation of the same information. This is just an informational item. I'm willing to listen to any questions and try to answer them to the best ability, but no additional voting information.
The next item on our agenda is informational items. Does anyone have any informational items they want to bring before the group? Are there any items from the committee or staff that are not on the agenda? Right. If there's no other discussion, somebody want to make a motion to adjourn?
I do have a couple quick questions, really quick. Is the confirming that the meeting on the 26th of the full board is in person?
Yes, it will be in person.
And just for informational purposes, do you know where the conference this year will be?
Yes.
Sound like
Uh,
you haven't got the.
Yes, it will be in Lexington, Kentucky at the Central Bank Center, the Rep Arena there.
Okay, thank you so much.
Not a problem.
See, I had easy questions.
I know that Metropolitan Housing Coalition is having I think it's April 7th, a day long about housing and energy. And like Kent Chandler is keynote at lunch. So few good speakers. So you should check it out.
Their report on energy costs is also really, really good.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody have anything else?
Well, good to see everybody. Pay attention to the weather tomorrow night, and I'll see y'all next.
Adjourn.
I move we adjourn.
Anybody want a second, or y'all want to just sit around?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'll second that then.
All right, thank you.
Thank you all. Have a good
Thank you.
afternoon.
Thank you.